do Wiradjuri Yuandu Alison Barnes. G'day, I hope you're well today. My name's Alison Barnes and I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman. I've lived up here in the mountains for just over a decade now, and one of the things I've noticed is the number of magpies that have started to move into my front yard. When I was a kid, I remember my pop was one of those people who could call magpies down from the trees. He would whistle for them and they would come from what to me as a child seemed like miles around. He had this huge fruit and vegetable garden in his backyard, so I'm not surprised the magpies loved him. But as a kid, I thought it was just magic the way he could do that. So every morning I love to see the magpies in my front yard having a look for a feed. It reminds me of my pop, who was a really very special person in my life. And it makes me feel like this place is becoming more like home. Magpies also have a special role in Aboriginal culture as well. In Wiradjuri, we have a story about magpies and currawongs working together to encourage the spirits in the sky to let go of some water so that it could rain, because the ground was thirsty. And so they always remind me of being called home, because the magpie's role in that story was to call the currawongs home so they didn't get stuck with the sky spirits. We now know through the cultural determinants of health how important these connections are, because if we don't have connections to people and country and culture, and I said country, but I'm going to say it as land so that everybody understands. If we don't have these connections, we don't just suffer a spiritual unrest or even an emotional unrest, we also become physically unwell. People who are connected to all of those good things have lower blood pressure and fewer episodes of heart disease. So connections matter. They actually genuinely physically matter. It's not just words or ideas. It's our health and well-being. And I think that it's really important to remember, as we're talking about housing and homes, it isn't just a building. It's not just a place where we sleep. It's somewhere that we feel safe and where we feel able to rest and are at peace, and where we feel we have connections. I think those old Aboriginal ways are as valid in the modern world as they ever have been, and we could all benefit from learning a bit more about the beauty and spirituality of Aboriginal culture. So today, as I've said, I'm in the beautiful Blue Mountains, which is the shared country of the Darug and Gundungurra people here in the beautiful Blue Mountains just west of Sydney, because that's my usual spiel. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and thank Darug and Gundungurra people for their hospitality, for allowing us to share in this truly magical place. And in case anyone needed reminding, this is, was, and always will be the unceded land of Aboriginal people. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Alison. I really feel like it grounds all of our work collectively in community and connection, which is, I think, the purpose really overall of the broad work that we're all doing, making sure everyone's taken care of and included and connected and has the ability to stay living on country or living in their communities. So a really fantastic way of grounding today. Welcome, everyone. We've had a few people join since we started, so I just wanted to shout out to Ben Harris, who's just joined, and Anastasia Vickers, who's another First Nations member of our Community Land Trust. Hello, lovely to meet you, Ben. Carly and a few others. So excited to have you all here. Today, just to relaunch our communities of practice, it's really, I think, just to create an environment where we can all, over the course of our journeys in investigating and being part of CLTs, share knowledge and essentially build a movement together across the country. So I think in relaunching, and also, I guess, for some of you, making you aware of the Australian Community Land Trust as well as the facilitator of the communities of practice. Uh, we are just excited, I think, to have this launch underway. So today we're going to hear from Waterfall Way Community Land Trust and the Blue Mountains Community Land Trust. There are other CLTs at different stages in the country, including William and Grace, as you were saying, Waratah down in Victoria, but there's various CLTs in startup stage all across the country, including Byron. So it's sort of an exciting time. The Australian Community Land Trust has a grant at the moment through the JMI policy platform to work on developing policy platforms that enable a thriving CLT sector. And as we know, there are barriers just in terms of literacy of what CLTs are in government and the community. The fact that people may not be aware that they can take action in their communities to make change that they want to see and what the options are for going forward with that. And building that platform for policy change is really important function of the Australian Community Land Trust Network, as well as the grassroots community that we're working with today. So just to kick things off, and I guess in the spirit of creativity and community, I'm going to hand over to Douglas or DJ, who's a member of our CLT, to do a rap. And so DJ, take it away.
Okay, that's a setup right there. Thank you, Genevieve, and greetings, everyone. You can hear from my accent. I am from North America. I'm from, as I put in the chat, from the Anishinaabe and Dakota homelands, also known as Twin Cities. We're currently living in Dara Country, Western Sydney. And what I'm going to share really quickly is really an experiment with trying to popularize the concept of not only CLTs, but generally the idea that people can play a meaningful role in the planning and development decisions that affect them. So yeah, I'm doing a PhD, which some of the folks on this call are involved in, and I am yeah, so basically produce this and just as a creative attempt to again try to popularize the message. So it goes, you know, there's a lot of people who make a killing off decisions that are made for us, that are not for us, and about us, without us. And while we watch them eat from these decision-making tables, here they come around asking for feedback on their menu options. So take these takeaways. Here we go, another survey, new buzzword craze, PowerPoints and power plays, public exhibition days. G'day, come in, have your say. Is it charrettes or charades? Democracy's on display. Your dough's too low to hold the property sold, but here's a box for the road. Your nibblies are getting cold. Thanks for your attendance. Even the resistance count engagement as acceptance, whether for it or against it. Job makers dangling wages, wrangling politicians, locked in profits raked in, housing stock tips. Option margins leave no room for movement movers, just rabid abusers and captive consumers. A pre-prepared pity because charity scares cities. These bars are rare, ritty, bear witty, bear with me. Collective action traction changes neighborhoods. The highest and best use can't refute the greater good. So what if instead of a survey and tokenistic wordplay and trying to have a say, we trailblaze our own way? I'm talking CDCs, CLTs, CDFIs, intentional communities. Each one of these provide ample examples of how neighborhoods might thrive and not get trampled, extracted on loop like a rap tune sample, the status quo canceled as big business gets handled. Build local capacity to navigate travesties and go from common tragedies to unified strategies to grow our own food and build our own homes and localize economies, cooperative zones, the wealth of nations gained from painstaking land. So for sustainable equity, we need a different plan. And yes, indeed, it starts with the seeds. To proceed, take heed and type the wisdom we all need. Have your say or make a way. Have your say or make a way. Have your say or make a way. You can have your say, but better make a way. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Grace.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, DJ. It really sets a good tone for things. Um, I will jump in. So Blue Mountains Community Land Trust. So from our CLT today, Teddy Loveney, Alison Barnes and DJ are all here. I'll just be talking through our sort of journey so far. We are a First Nations and community-led community land trust. And we always start meetings with these two poems, both from dear community members who've passed away very sadly since we started our community land trust, who are part of our CLT. And the poem on the left is about the artwork in the middle. So Arnie Pip Smith, my painting is about tracks going around in life. Here we go again, homeless, just another number, just another statistic. Here we go again, around and around, trying to get a key to security, but always out of reach, never found. And talking about her experience. And Arnie Carey Miller's on the poem really grounds our work in the lived experience of our community, and is a real sort of call to acknowledge that the lived experience often of Aboriginal community members, who've survived the stolen generations, is really the place we need to start when we think about housing in our community. So these poems and artwork form the preamble to our future constitution, which is exciting as well. So, I mean, I don't think any of you will need an introduction to the housing crisis, but the general situation in our community is that 90% of all of our rentals are short-term rentals, and we've got a housing affordability crisis, an unaffordability crisis, really. We started as an organisation back in 2020, and it was really just out of frustration when we didn't see any action from government. And the reason that community land trusts were really attractive, and Louise Crabtree, you've done so much work at, I guess, building this community over many, many years, and so we acknowledge your effort, and also the work you did at helping build the literacy in our community. But within the context of our community, and I guess the place where we need to start is about the idea that we steward land rather than own land, and the community land trust is a model that enables that. In our instance, because we've got a really strong community, very connected community, where people like Annie Carol Cooper is a Darrigan Gundungurra elder here, very strong community as well. So First Nations and elder leadership and governance was a really important part of the process for us. And the really sort of, I guess, attractive thing about CLTs is that it does so much more than housing, really challenging the status quo, decommodifying housing and land, and it gives us the opportunity to fight for multi-species habitats and multi-species justice alongside dedicated housing for traditional owners and the Aboriginal community. Co-design and community-led systems change is also a really strong feature for us that is the foundation of our work. So since 2020, most of our work's sort of been really about building the literacy in government, but also in the community about what a CLT is and what it can do. And also a lot of the process has been about finding out what people really want and need out of housing, which most of them hadn't been asked before. So on the left, one of the community forums we held was about creating a vision collectively around what the CLT could do. In the centre here is, one of the meetings we had with RMIT researchers and Louise Crabtree from WSU, which was a funding and research partnership. Our community meetings regularly are held in Belong Blue Mountains, which is an organisation that has a staff member dedicated to helping community organisations like us get off the ground. So having access to meeting spaces for free has been a really important part of that. Meeting with local member Trish Doyle and other local councillors has been a really critical part of, I guess, building support across all the levels of government for us. Housing forums that we've hosted online throughout COVID, with 50 or 60 people attending from all walks of life. one key part of our work that came through the Strategic Impact Fund with RMIT was holding on-country yarns with the community, the broader Aboriginal community, to talk about housing. And this one was hosted in the Gully, which is a really significant place in our community, particularly in the Aboriginal community. And then a protest which we held in early 2024, which was really out of frustration at the number of Airbnbs and the fact that we wanted more from the housing system. So all of this work collectively over the last 4 years has led to us having, I guess, an idea of where we want to go as an organisation, but has also kind of built a community of people around us that are not just in need of housing, but really support the initiative more broadly. One of the things that we found out through one of the co-design workshops was what people want. So we wanted to focus on repurposing degraded land rather than, obviously we're in a World Heritage area, so there's a lot of construction that goes on that means we've got to knock down a lot of trees. So looking at degraded land was a key part of that. Having diverse housing types, and one of the things that Ani Jacinta Tobin was really keen on was homes for seasonal movement across country, which was a really fascinating way of thinking about home and housing. Where we're grounded in, I guess, elder leadership, multi-species justice, belonging, cultural protocol. So working with cultural protocol was really important, that we think about country first, interconnected systems, and housing being one of those. And then this idea of community hubs, and that included housing and health services and art spaces and things that were close to transport. One of the key things I'd say just from our perspective is that the relationships we've had with local government have been instrumental in, I guess, getting the policy settings in place for us to be able to then do the work we need to do. And one of those was the work that Alison and I did, and others in our CLT, with our Blue Mountain City Council, in developing their housing affordability policy. And we fought for the definition of affordable to be 30% of household income, rather than the sort of, at the time, the state government measure, which was 80% of market rate rents. We fought for the inclusion of Aboriginal community housing providers so that there was culturally safe housing, even if it wasn't CLT housing. Community land trusts were included in the policy, I think at first in Australia, but correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the room. And the other key part was advocating for the inclusion of land. And so our council are currently doing a land audit, and I know, Kerry, the work that you've done has really been key there, but doing a land audit to say, okay, what land is available for community land trust or affordable housing initiatives. Just more recently, a really key site came up for us. So last year, we met with Trish Doyle, and Auntie Kerry Miller, before she passed, a really loved member of the community, had said, Genevieve, what about Clairvaux? What about Clairvaux? You need to put that on the list. So we met with our state member last year, and she said to us, okay, what are your 5 key demands? And we said, well, Auntie Kerry had said a number of times, well, we need land and we need money, Genevieve. So the land, we pretty much, in sort of slightly more elaborate terms, is what we told Trish, but we included Clairvaux in the list of demands to the state government because of the long history that the communities had, and also that at the moment the transfer of the land was meant to happen back in 2002, and when it got to Treasury, it didn't happen. And so there was this apparent transfer of the land back to the Gundungurra Tribal Council, which didn't actually happen in practice. So here we are again fighting to keep this land in our hands. The sites that we're looking at the moment are part of Clairvaux Community Centre, and there's been a bit of a sort of long story about these places in particular. And just earlier this year, we found out that the Wild Plant Rescue, which is a brilliant organisation up here that's been running for about 20 years, were being evicted off the site. So we got wind of this and met with them and Auntie Bev and Auntie Carol, and did a bit of a walk of the sites with, there's you, DJ, and Uncle Ed in the front. to talk about whether or not this could be a CLT site for us. So the sites are located near what we'd call an innovation precinct, boldly, but they're both residentially zoned, which is quite unusual. They're state-owned by Department of Communities and Justice, and they are within this sort of residential neighbourhood, as well as quite a kind of dominant tourist precinct. But we saw how these sites could be a showcase for cultural activities, bush food, social enterprise, ecotourism, and showcasing the innovation of traditional owner-led development. So that was a really key one, and implementing what we have in New South Wales, the Connecting with Country framework, with traditional owner leadership in that. So we've been doing a lot of analysis about these two sites at the moment. We don't just in terms of what would be achievable. So before we even have the land title, I guess, we need to understand as an organisation what's possible. So this sort of process of really analysis of a site and what's feasible or not, I guess as an architect, I've got some skills, but we've had a huge amount of help from planners and people who are across the sector to sort of give us advice. But we've also had immense support from our strategic planning team in council, because they want to see housing that's for the community, and they also want to see it done really well. So we put together a sort of bold pitch to government, and we had a roundtable with our Housing Minister, Rose Jackson, and the Aboriginal Housing Office, Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure, Homes New South Wales, to talk about this project. But essentially what these sites offer us is the ability to have housing at the intersection of health, wellbeing and economic empowerment, or initiatives that can enable those. And I think that's the real key part of what CLTs can do, is potentially, and in the instance of this site, really be able to deliver where housing is co-located, of course, with these services, but also seen as central to people getting access to and being able to have well-being and economic empowerment and health. So there's a bit more detail in here, and I won't go on about that too much, but we're looking at a kind of multi-use, I guess, site, including potentially Aboriginal community housing, managed properties, cluster housing with communal spaces, and retaining and expanding the existing community uses on the site. So we did a bit of a costing of this based on some prefab housing that we'd found that had fixed prices we could access, that were current, that were flame zone rated. And we did some initial plans that meant we could get about 28 homes in cluster housing on community title. And if we looked at the numbers, given particularly for Aboriginal community members looking at home ownership through IBA, Indigenous Business Australia, you can see on the right there the total repayments for housing, a 3-bedroom house at 226. Perhaps there's some increases in that, but the level of affordability we could achieve was really fantastic. So the timeline that we've got at the minute is pretty, as Kerry, I know you're going through this, quite intense. But one of the key parts for us, we're not incorporated yet, because we've got to get some funding to develop a constitution which embeds two-way or Aboriginal law and custom as well as white law and custom into our constitution. And Michael Limerick and Associates is a specialist who does that with a lot of native title groups. So we're looking at how do we actually embed elder leadership and governance in the CLT into perpetuity as a really important gesture. And I guess to do that, we've got to run some workshops and really workshop how that would function. And so it's a little bit more of a complicated process even than what a basic CLT constitution is, Kerry, which you've done so much amazing work on. So that's a sort of general process looking forward to us, and there's already been some change in this. But I'd just stop sharing quickly and hand back to Kerry in a minute, because we will run out of time. But I think the main thing I wanted to say is that I think Alison and Teddy and DJ and others that are joining our from our CLT would say that it's not a linear process. It's not a neat process. It's we're all doing it voluntarily. It's been really hard work. We've had conflict and tension in our committee. We've gone through ebbs and flows. I think we've lost Arnie Pip-Smith and Arnie Carey along the way. I have to say that now that we have the potential of a particular block of land, there's a lot more energy and there's a lot more ability for us to really be focused on moving forward much quicker. And so I guess in terms of what we've found over, I guess, the 5 years we've been going is that not giving up has been a real big one. Just plugging away at it slowly over time, and you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and keep talking about it and keep educating people and keep trying. New people come into the mix and some people leave, and we're just sort of it's a moving feast really. But for us, I guess there's been really key things, which is moving at the speed of trust, which is saying that we have to work on the relationships first, and that is within our organisation, but it's also within the broader community and network of organisations. But letting the speed of our progress be governed by our ability to take care of each other in the process, and also be based on our ability and capacity. And so I think they're the core things really about how we move forward. And there's an advantage that we have in not being governed by government timelines and milestones, is because we can really be in charge of that timeline, and the community can be self-determined in that. So yeah, thank you everyone. I'll hand over quickly to Kerry. Do you want me to share your slide?
Yeah, that would be much better because it just keeps jumping out of it.
No worries, I'll do that.
Thanks.
1 second.
Hi, everybody. That was a very hard presentation to follow, Genevieve.
Was it?
It was fantastic.
Oh, I thought you said it was very hard. Yeah. Oh,
hard to follow.
Oh, okay, right.
Because you've told the story in such a considered way. And there's lots of threads that are in common, even though our project's very different. Thank you, Genevieve. So I just want to start by acknowledging the Gumbaynggirr people, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land that we're living and working on, and who have never ceded sovereignty. And pay our respects to elders past and present, and all of the First Nations people also on this call. Thanks, Genevieve. So I've compiled a photo story really, which is a selection of photos that help tell the story about our origins. I was invited to talk about how we established and how we're doing our work and what the conditions are that have supported that. So really, we just had a little bit of a slideshow to go through together. But I just thought I'd start with this timeline, which is very similar to the story that Genevieve told. We started in 2018, and various critical things happened over that period, which I'm going to speak to, which now get us to 2025 with the possibility of some land. So a similar sort of story where we're both looking at the possibility of land, which is great. Thanks, Genevieve. So I want to take us back to 2018, and you might recognise that that's a very young-looking Louise Crabtree Hayes on the right down the bottom. And the Waterfall Way CLT came out of a vision of a group of local residents, and I'm one of them, and there's a couple of others on the call. Just a bit of a call out to Rose, who I noticed a few minutes ago in particular. We were really concerned that housing affordability was becoming tougher and tougher in the area that we live in, which is the Bellingen Shire. We could see house prices increasing pretty quickly and the gap between house prices and local wages increasing. We saw gentrification happening, and we saw locals who were on moderate or low incomes really being pushed out. And as a group of residents back in 2017 and 2018, we wanted to do something about that, and try and take some local action locally and unlock housing solutions locally, because we were really worried that if we waited for government to act, that that just would take too long. And so with the help of the Bellingen Neighbourhood Centre and Lifetime Reconnect in Nambucca, we formed a group which then was called the Bellingen Nambucca Housing Action Group. And we're an entirely volunteer group of residents who got together to educate ourselves about the housing system and to figure out where there might be pressure points where we could take some action and to try and stop that housing stress that was increasing. So this first photo is of our first housing forum. We had and still have a big commitment to collective learning, and we hosted our first forum in 2018, which was aimed at helping build our and the community's literacy in housing. And we thought if we got 50 people come to that forum, we'd be happy, and we got 120. And we were very lucky that one of the people who came to that forum to speak was Louise, and she introduced us to the Community Land Trust model. Thanks, Genevieve. And so what we did as a result of that first forum was some action planning. We actually did that action planning as a group in the second day of the forum, and we identified, I think at the time, about 45 different priorities that people who were all volunteers wanted to work on in terms of tackling the housing issues in our community. And one of those working groups was the Community Land Trust Working Group. And the photo on the left are the members of that Community Land Trust working group when we first established. And that photo is taken on the veranda of my partner's and my house. And you might see me in the left-hand side of that photo holding up the Bible, which is the Australian Community Land Trust Manual. Thank you, Louise, and all of your colleagues. So what we did as a group, and it wasn't by design, but you can probably see in that photo that there's not very many in that photo. And there seems to be a sort of average age that's probably a bit more than 30 or 40. So the group of us who came together really studied the Land Trust Manual. We worked through the chapters. I would read the chapters and then design a workshop on that chapter so we could learn about it together, and we just came together and kept on self-educating ourselves based on the manual, and that's how we learned about the model. And we did that over 2019 and 2020. Thanks, Genevieve. And we got to a point in that work. Sorry, the other thing I should say over this time is that the housing affordability issue became more than just housing stress. It became an absolute housing crisis. And I know that's been the case everywhere, really. And I haven't included any slides on this, but just to say that really during COVID, things got really bad, and the capacity for people on local wages to find anywhere secure to live over that period of time was just an absolute disaster. And it's still, whilst things have eased up a little bit since then, it hasn't readjusted. And so if you're wanting to buy a house in the Bellingen area where I live, then if you're looking at the regional median wage, the median house price is 14 times the wage. That's the wage to house price ratio is 14. And when you look at the affordability information and people's wages, key workers, we've got a real crisis at the hospital now. We can't retain staff because nurses can't afford to live here. This story I know is repeated in many communities, and it's really reached a pressure cooker here. So our focus is absolutely on trying to find forever secure and affordable homes for people in this region on local wages, because they're the people and we're the people who actually keep the community going. So just to say that's the focus of our work, and that became evident over the time that we were forming when we were looking through the manual. So we got to the point with that manual work that we were self-educating ourselves, where we said, yes, we think this model can work here, but we need help to make that happen. And we've reached the extent of our expertise without any extra help. And so we went to Bellingen Shire Council and said, we think we've got a big problem in the community in terms of housing stress and lack of affordability. We think this model could help. The general manager at the time was very interested in that and was able to secure some funding from the Joint Organisation of Councils to commission the first Australian Community Land Trust Proof of Concept project. And that really looked at the model and tested whether it could work on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. And a call out to Rebecca Richardson from Urban Ester and Peter Phibbs, who is also one of the founding members of the Australian Community Land Trust Network, who did that work, because that really then set the story for what would come next. Now, I've got my slides a bit mixed up, so I might get you to go to the next, have a look at, the people having a nice time at that bottom slide, and then we'll go to the next one, because what happened, so back, Genevieve, sorry. So just going to sit here for a minute. So what happened after we did that community proof of concept project was commissioned, which we were involved in managing, and it was a very collaborative process with council, was that when that report said it was possible, through the Housing Matters Action Group, we were very, very fortunate to be backed by a philanthropic foundation. So up till that point, all of the work that we've been doing had been fully as volunteers. And whilst we had a group of people who had a lot of capacity and skills across the group, there was only so much that we could achieve. And so I really want to make the point that being supported by the Siddle Family Foundation, who decided on the basis of their relationship with the Housing Matters Action Group and also that proof of concept report to back us to do what we could to establish a CLT here, has made a huge difference. And in July 2023, we were funded to start establishing the CLT, and that was an absolute game changer. And we're still funded by the Siddle Family Foundation to establish the Waterfall Way CLT, and I now work on this project 2.5 days a week. But what's really clear to me is that for this model to work, we really need to secure government funding to support CLTs to go through the establishment phase, because it's a big job and it's complicated and there's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. Thanks, Genevieve. So I also want to say that that we've been funded to develop materials and resources as we go, so that they're open source. And so anything that we're doing is available to other groups, and we'll, find ways to keep sharing that. So we'll flick through these slides because I'm probably running out of time. But, last year after we got that funding, lots of things happened because we had the resources to do it. I couldn't find any other photos. So that photo on the top left-hand side is a face-to-face meeting that the Australian Community Land Trust Network had with people from different government agencies in New South Wales last year. And that was just a marker to say that one of the things that happened over this time was that people like Genevieve and Louise and myself and Viv Milligan and Peter Phibbs and a few other people got together to establish the Australian Community Land Trust Network, which is hosting this call. And I think that's been a big achievement over this time. The photo on the bottom right-hand side is the advisory group that worked with us last year in the lead up to us becoming incorporated, us being the Waterfall ACLT. Next slide, thanks, Genevieve. And Genevieve mentioned the land audit. One of the things that we did last year, sorry, I'll back up. There were two key messages coming out of the proof of concept. One was that the model could work, but there were two significant barriers, and they are, no surprise, access to finance and access to land. And so they're our two big priorities. And last year we did a comprehensive land audit of all of the land in the Bellingen Shire and shortlisted the sites to a point where we understood what not-for-profit land existed in the Shire and who owned it and what could work, and started discussions with council about some council land. And happy to share that methodology if any groups are interested in that land audit. Thanks, Genevieve. And we also did a huge amount of work on our constitution, and we haven't developed, we're not a Indigenous or First Nations led CLT, and we haven't developed a two ways constitution. And I think it's fantastic that the Blue Mountains CLT is doing that. We found it hard enough just to develop a generic constitution, I have to say. And it took us a long time to work through the decision making associated with things like the resale formula and those sorts of things. But we got there. And one of the things that we did do in our constitution was recognise that sovereignty hadn't been ceded here, and that we wanted to enter into relationships with Gumbaynggirr people and First Nations people on housing responses through this work. And those discussions, now that there's potentially land, are now underway. I think we're nearly there, Genevieve. So this is, I think, the last photo, and it was in March this year, outside the council chambers, when the mayor tabled a minute with council to ask the councillors' agreement to start looking at a particular parcel of land that we have identified as being possible for a demonstration site. So I didn't include any visuals on that land because that's currently being considered and it hasn't been decided yet, but we were pretty exciting that council unanimously passed the minute to look into the feasibility of how best to do it. And we're now doing our financial feasibility on that site based on a shared equity model for local workers. And that's pretty much where we are. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kerry. Fantastic. I am just catching up on any comments in the chat just to see if anyone's popped any questions in. I have some myself. And there's so much work that you've done just beyond what you've talked about, Kerry, which I think, you know, we need a whole COP just on the finance side of things and the works you've done with the banks, and we need a whole COP on the developing the constitution. But I just thought I'd throw it out to those who've joined us just to see if you've got any questions or if there's anything that you'd like us to sort of expand on.
Genevieve, can I make one more point just before you go to the first question, which is I just wanted to really reinforce Genevieve and Grace's comments at the beginning that this is a story about partnerships and working together. And there are many people who are partners to this work for us up here who I didn't talk about, but it absolutely couldn't happen without that whole of community collaboration.
Totally agree. Teddy.
I'll break the ice on questions if you like. This maybe is sort of more of a high level question for the CLT network. I'm really interested in, based on what I know of both the Blue Mountain CLT and the Waterfall CLT, that there are challenges in Australia's existing kind of legal, financial, charities infrastructure. That means that CLT models are a little bit more complex here than they are in international contexts. So particularly with a rental model, an affordable rental model, how does this Australian CLT network define a CLT sort of as different to a community housing project where land and or property is owned by the CHP?
Can I defer that question to Louise Crabtree-Hayes?
Sure, but I'll probably flick it back to you anyway. But the main thing I think is actually in the membership base. So most of the CHPs, well, yeah, the vast majority of the CHPs don't have that big, broad membership base to them and that active membership voice in the types of developments that they undertake. Now, having said that, there are some CHPs that are themselves cooperatives where the residents are essentially self-govern and in some instances are the CHP themselves. What those CHPs, how they differ from CLTs is that people who aren't in the housing can't be members of them. So the CLT structure in terms of having resident voice, but also a broader membership who is literally anyone who lives in your area who thinks the CLT is a good idea can become part of it even if they don't need housing and don't ever move into the housing that the CLT delivers. So that's where their role as, there's really place-based perpetual stewards and development sort of entities that are constantly keeping all of those people in dialogue around what's the best thing for our place, and what does that mean now and what does it mean now? Like that's the thing that's unique about them, regardless of the form of housing or forms plural that they then deliver. It's that balancing of the voices and interests and having that really proactive ongoing space to talk about, well, what does permanent affordability mean and what does community benefit mean? And how do we best address those? So that's the thing that I think is absolutely unique about them. Yeah.
That's so helpful. Thank you. As a peak, is the net, and I know that we're in this like emerging space where we're trying to work out what the infrastructure will actually produce in order to create this model in a more fixed, defined sense. Like, is there an aspiration for the network to create or establish what that definition is so that it becomes a protected concept and not everyone can just call themselves a CLT? I assume there's a bit of like, the ACNC needs to come to the party before you can do that. But is that
there's a good story there because like my mum back in the late 70s started a organic co-op in Bathurst of all places, and then went on to be a sort of pioneer in the organics industry, and she really found that there are a lot of kind of bad players in the industry and set up the Organic Retailers Association to basically create some definitions around what it was to be an organic retailer. And it sort of set an ethical bar, I guess, for the industry. And I guess when we were talking about setting up the network, obviously Louise has been the key stalwart in the sector for so many years, but there seemed like there was a real necessity for advocacy around just what you're talking about, Teddy, and also an organisation that could kind of steer the movement in the right direction. And I think one of the risks that we've just got in Australia is that it's everything is so developer heavy and so influenced by the developer sector, for-profit developer sector, that they, you can see how the build to rent model in New South Wales is just sort of the new housing asset. thing, you know. So like even the affordable sector is getting taken over and kind of controlled, I guess, by that sector. And you can see how even the CHP sector, through submissions that the Urban Task Force make to government, that they want developers to be able to be CHPs now. So that was the impetus, and really that definition is key. So it's to say that community is central to it. From our perspective, country is central to it, but there's also that need for a legal setting, so that government, when they hand you land, are like, okay, we're not just handing it over to this risky thing that we don't really have any definitions for, and it might just get sold on the open market. So it provides guidance for the sector in its growth, and it also provides safety and security for government in their ability to resource, and also through land or finance, as you suggest, Kerry, the sector going forward. Yeah. We're coming up to time, and I just thought I'd see if anyone else had any questions. Pressing questions at the minute. I'm hoping there's too many. One of the things I think that we're wanting to do is to obviously host a series of communities of practice, and we'll be emailing you to, and sorry, I should also introduce Anastasia, because who's in the Zoom, and she is employed by the Australian Community Land Trust Network to convene the communities of practice. And so she will be in touch with you and any organisations that are emerging to just see what could be of use in these COPs. So we can cover the finance stuff, we can cover the development stuff, we can cover that grassroots action stuff, and really just wanting to have the community of people working on CLTs to be directing that process. So given it's World CLT Day, I just wanted to do a screenshot, if that's okay, and have us all just wave, and I'll do the screenshot. If we can just all wave to the CLTs across the country, that'd be